Well, greetings and welcome to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast. I'm your host, Jason Mullet. You can visit our website at logicalbelief.org. You can watch these podcasts on YouTube. Just subscribe to the channel there. You can also find us on iTunes. Just search for Logical Belief and subscribe to our feed there. You can find both the audio and the video from the previous podcasts on the website. If you just look at the top menu bar there, just click on podcast, you can see both the video and the audio there. If you have a word of encouragement or a question or just a comment that you want to send to me, you can send those to jason@logicalbelief.org.
Mark your calendar. Jersey Fire is July 8th and 9th in Toms River, New Jersey. The topic, the Word of God. The speakers, Matt Slick from Christian Apologetics Research Ministry, Justin Peters from Justin Peters Ministry, and Andrew Rappaport from Striving for Eternity. Jersey Fire will equip you to talk to the lost and then put what you learn into practice with guidance and support from seasoned evangelists. Jersey Fire, July 8th and 9th in Toms River, New Jersey. For details, go to jerseyfire.org.
Alrighty, just a reminder before we jump into today's episode is for those of you that saw last week's episode, I made an announcement for a drawing that we will do for winning Jason Lyell's book, The Ultimate Proof of Creation. Hold this up to the camera here. So you can be eligible to win a copy of The Ultimate Proof of Creation. I think one of the best primers out there to presuppositional apologetics. It's a good, it's really one of the best books out there to date for jumping in and beginning to understand presuppositional apologetics. After that, I would recommend you graduate to some other works, some of Bonson's works and Van Til's works, but this is a great work to start off with, and will help you begin to engage with people and from unbelievers from a presuppositional position. So if you want to be eligible to win this book, just go out onto the iTunes feed and post a comment, feedback on the podcast from iTunes, and I will put everybody that posts feedback into a drawing. We'll do about another week. So far, I think I've only seen one. I haven't checked in a few days, but last time I saw, only one person so far had posted feedback. So only one of you out there currently is eligible to win the book. So your probability of winning it is fairly high at this point. So if you want that, go ahead and sign up there. As I said before, we'll do the drawing probably not next week, but the following week. And whoever wins, you'll just send me your address via email, and I will have it shipped to you. I will even try shipping to Australia and Great Britain, because I know I have some listeners there also. So wherever you're at, I'm going to try to get the book to you. So if you're the one who wins it. So just be aware of that. So if you're interested. So today I'm going to finish up and wrap up a series. I've got like all these different series going, and I don't seem to really end any of them. And we finally did get the Anabaptist one done. But today I wanted to finish the one that I had started on Trinitarian and Christological Heresies. And so we had done an episode several weeks ago. Oh man, it's probably over a month ago now, on Trinitarian heresies. So if you're interested in that, go back and check that out. Some of those things that we talked about there will provide a little bit of a foundation to today's episode. And that's because these things are so interlinked and meshed in with one another. So if you're a modalist or a monarchianist, that's going to affect your view of the incarnation. And so therefore you'll probably have an aberrant Christology. So that's why I started off with Trinitarian heresies. And so today we're going to go into the muddled field of Christological heresies. There is so many different aberrant views out there. Now, you may ask, why is this important? Why do we as Christians take such a strong stance on the orthodox views of the Trinity and the incarnation of Jesus Christ? And that is because these things fundamentally strike at the gospel itself. If Jesus is not divine, then he is not our righteousness. He is not the righteousness of God. As Luther, as he was reading through Romans chapter 1, and he got to, I believe it was verse 17, and he read about the righteousness of God. If Jesus is not divine, then we do not have the righteousness of God. If Jesus is not man, then he is not our substitute. He is not our kinsman redeemer. And so these are very important. The divinity and the humanity of Jesus Christ is extremely important to our salvation, which is why we hold on to this so strongly and affirm that these are essentials of the Christian faith. If Jesus is not divine, we have no righteousness. If Jesus is not man, if he is not human, we have no substitute. If Jesus would have just been a creature, his own righteousness would have been sufficient only for his own salvation and not for the salvation of anyone else. If Jesus was not human, then he could have not died in our place. He could not have been the substitute for us. In the same way in the Old Testament, the sacrificial system under the Mosaic Law, the blood of goats and sheep were never sufficient for purging the sins of any particular person. And that is because they are not a substitute for us, and they do not have the righteousness of God. So, excuse me here, trying to get rid of a cough here. So, this is very, very important for us as believers. One thing that you will also notice, every group out there, cult, that has an aberrant view of the Trinity will also, nevertheless, then have an aberrant view of the incarnation. But you will notice that they also never have a true monergistic gospel of grace. They will always have a gospel that involves synergistic actions required from man in order for salvation to be accomplished. Only true biblical Christianity, which has a proper view of the Godhead, the Trinity, and has a proper view of the incarnation, will have a true gospel of grace where God saves. It is God alone who saves. And so we notice that as we look at cults and people that have aberrant views. And this is why, for example, those of you that listen to the Anabaptist series, this is why Kevin and I were so strong on the false teaching of the early Anabaptists called celestial flesh. And that is because if Jesus is not of the same flesh that we are, then he is not human. And if he is not human, we have no substitute. And so, therefore, that doctrine strikes at the core of the gospel itself. And so, that is why why we hold those things to be so important. So I'm going to transition here. I put together a presentation as I normally do when I do these things. I put together a presentation here entitled Christology. So I'm going to go ahead and transition here the screen. So those of you guys listening only, if you want to, I will provide, as always, in the show notes on the website, a PDF copy of this presentation so that you can look at it and you can download it if you want to. And I will do my best to translate the information here for audio only. Make sure I talk about everything. But for those of you obviously watching, this will be a little easier so that because you are watching the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and transition here to the full screen. And you can see it there. And we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So the first thing that we want to look at is Orthodox Christianity, what we hold to is what's called the hypostatic union. And this comes from the Greek word hypostasis. And the hypostatic union is the Orthodox Christian position that the divine and human natures of Christ are united in one hypostasis, or individual existence or person. The Greek word hypostasis means sediment, foundation, substance, subsistence. In English, it would be the word person. So Jesus Christ is one subsistence with two natures, a divine and a human nature. And the hypostatic union became defined in the 4th century in a dispute that arose between Cyril of Alexandria and Nestorius, which we will look at later. Nestorius, we will look at him. But Nestorius had an issue with the term Theotokos, which was what the early church used to refer to as Mary. They referred to as the Mother of God. Now, the early church's affirmation of Mary as Theotokos is different than the modern Roman Catholic Church's view of Mary as Theotokos. They view Mary as almost divine and something or a person to be worshipped because of her title as Theotokos. The early church did not look at her as that. Their view of Mary as Theotokos, or Mother of God, bearer of God, was because Jesus was God. They did not. They recognized that Jesus was one person with a divine nature, and so Mary gave birth to that person. So therefore, they were simply affirming the deity of Christ with the term Theotokos. The title was more about Christ than it was about Mary. However, Nestorius argued about this, and he said that Mary, he argued that they could not use this title for Mary because she only was mother to the human nature of Christ and not the divine nature. And he would be correct on that Mary did not provide the divine nature. That's obvious. The divine nature has eternally existed as God. Jesus, as the eternal Son of God, has always existed. He has been omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, omnosapient, just as his Father. He is co-eternal and has eternally existed as the Father and the Spirit has. And so Mary was not the source of the substance of the divine nature, or the essence of the divine nature. But Nestorius took it too far, and he actually affirmed that Jesus was two persons, and so, or two subsistences. And so we'll look at Nestorianism a little while later, but in the Council of Ephesus in 431, the hypostatic union was established as an orthodox doctrine, that Jesus had both a divine and human nature united in the one hypostasis, or individual essence, or individual existence or person. And so this was confirmed in Ephesus in 431 AD, and it was a response to Nestorianism, the hypostatic union. So I put together a little graphic here to kind of try to illustrate the different views out there of Jesus Christ in the incarnation. Some views tend to go to the left, where they only affirm his being the creator or God, and different heresies there are like Monophysitism. We'll look at Monophysitism, Docetism, and Eutychianism. There's another one that we're going to talk about, which I did not put on here, is like Monoenergism or Monothelitism. But those would exist here closer to the middle here, closer to the hypostatic union, but would still lean towards the divinity of Christ. There's confusion there. And then we have to the far right, we have the creaturely, the created being aspect of Jesus. And those views, like Arianism or modern Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and Adoptionism, would affirm the creaturely, only the human nature of, or Adoptionism would. Adoptionism would affirm only the human nature of Jesus Christ and would deny his divinity. Arianism, on the other hand, acknowledges that Jesus is a created being in his divine nature, as they would say it, but that nature did not eternally exist as God. And we'll talk about a word called heterousios when we talk about Arianism in a little bit. So that's a term that will be coming up. So Adoptionism and Arianism focus on the creaturely nature of Jesus, whereas Monophysitism, Docetism, and Eutychianism focus on the creator aspect of it. In the middle there, we have two views, and the Orthodox Christian view, which is the hypostatic union, that there was both a divine and human nature. He was fully God and fully man, not half God and half man, but that he was fully God and fully man, united in one hypostasis, or one person, one subsistence. Two natures in one subsistence, or one person. Nestorianism took the hypostatic union even further. Nestorius acknowledged both the divine and human natures of Jesus, but he said that resulted in two subsistences, which is why he was so opposed to the term Theotokos for Mary. And so he said that Jesus was two persons. So that is the extreme view of the Orthodox view, is Nestorianism, whereas the other views are aberrations going the other direction. Other directions, either left or right. So there's a little graphic to kind of maybe help you understand that. So in the confusion of all the different Christological heresies that have existed throughout time, and they're always just regurgitated. There's nothing ever new under the sun. One is Pentecostalism, modern-day Jehovah's Witnesses, or even some Anabaptists that I've met that have denied the humanity of Christ. And I don't understand that. That's something that maybe if some of you guys have some insight into that, there's a friend of mine that I've been talking to, and we've been like, why is it that very synergistic Christian groups will tend to often deny the humanity of Christ? There is a tendency there, and I'm not sure what that comes from yet, but there is a tendency that they do that. And I have encountered Anabaptists that have denied the humanity of Christ, which would go back to even the early Anabaptists and their celestial flesh doctrine. So the modern Anabaptists I've heard actually that hold to that position, even somebody that was a friend of mine that I used to sing on I used to actually sing on a gospel quartet with several other Mennonite guys back before I was actually a Christian. But one of the members of that group did not actually had a form of, I would say, Eutychianism in his Christological view. And I don't think he was even aware of the celestial flesh doctrine, but that was kind of the view that he held. And so that is a common thing that seems to happen among synergistic groups, and I'm not exactly sure what the reason is for that. But I have to put more thought into that. But so one of the things that you're going to encounter when you're studying early church history and the time of the Council of Nicaea especially, is you're going to encounter three different terms, but two primarily, and this is the term homoousios and homoiousios. And I'll dig into it here in a little bit, what these different terms mean. But all of these have as their stem or their root is the term ousia, which means being, substance, or essence. So the ontos, the ontology of a person or being is we refer to this as nature or ontos today, or being is the term ousia. And so we have then homoousios, which is same substance or essence or being, which is the Orthodox Christian view. And then we have homoi. The only difference between, here's the interesting thing, the only difference between homoousios and homoiousios is the Greek letter iota right here, the iota. So which this means a similar substance or essence. And this is the view of the semi-Arians or even the Origenists. It was a cause of big controversy. If you read any church history about post-Nicene era that Athanasius was a part of, this was a big argument, was between this little iota in the Nicene Creed. The semi-Arians and Origenists could change, and many of them in the Eastern Church could change the Nicene Creed just by one letter, just insert the iota, and they could affirm the Nicene Creed because it would change it to Jesus was of a similar substance to the Father and not the same substance as the Father. And this is opposed to the Arian doctrine of heteroousios. And here we have heteroousios on the screen here. So we have homoiousios, the same, or homoousios, which is the same substance. Jesus is the same substance and essence of the Father. And then we have homoiousios, which Jesus is the Son of God, is a similar substance to the Father. And then we have heteroousios, which he is a completely different substance from the Father. And so homoousios is what we as Orthodox Trinitarians would hold to. Many of the, like I said, the Origenists and semi-Arians, like Eusebius of Caesarea, also known as the father of church history, and I have actually a book by Eusebius, and he affirmed homoiousios, that Jesus was of a similar substance of the Father, a subordinate substance to the Father. Now, this brings into question then the doctrine of monotheism. So if Jesus is only a similar substance to the Father, very close to the same but yet different, then this brings into question, is there only one God, or is there two gods or three gods? Because if Jesus, as the eternal Son of God, is of a homoiousios, then the Spirit would also be homoiousios, and so then we end up with tritheism. So this was the issue that the early church had to battle with. And so then the Arians took on that Jesus was heteroousios. He was a created being of a completely different substance and essence of the Father. And that is the Arian position, which was condemned at the Council of Nicaea. So you can see that, as we talked about before, as the view of the Trinity is very crucial in the discussion of Christological errors. So the Christological heresies that we're going to talk about today are going to... looks like I moved forward a slide too far. Move back. We're going to look at Docetism. We're going to look at Monophysitism, Eutychianism, Nestorianism, Adoptionism, Arianism, and Monothelitism. These are the 7 Christological heresies that we're going to look at, and the ones that you should be familiar with. And the reason you should be familiar with these is as you are out there witnessing, sharing the gospel with people, living within the church body, you're going to, from time to time, encounter people that have maybe a little bit aberrant views of the incarnation of Christ. And by being aware of some of these heresies, you can help guard yourself and also warn those that are leaning towards some of these heretical views, that you can warn them that these are not Orthodox Christian views. And my goal is not today to get into, to dig in depth into the biblical foundation for the Orthodox Christian positions, but I'll briefly mention them as we go along. So, the first one we're going to look at is Docetism. Now, this is really one of the oldest heresies, and we see this already addressed by even the New Testament writers. And Docetism comes from two Greek words. Yeah, it's dokein and dokesis. Dokein means to seem, and dokesis means like an apparition or a phantom. And this is the belief that Jesus only appeared to be human, and that his human form was an illusion. This was a belief held by many of the early Gnostics and comes from a Gnostic worldview. And this comes back to Platonism and things like that, where you have the eternal logos, the essence, the source of all goodness, and then you have these aeons that emanated out from this that got less good, and until you come down to the point where you have a demigod or a demiurge, sorry, not a demigod, but a demiurge that actually created the universe, because all matter is evil, which is a Gnostic view. And the source of all things, the eternal logos, is the only thing that is good, and so therefore he is so good that he could not have actually created. So some lower demiurge, a much lower aeon from this pure source of goodness, is what had to create the world, and it created it evil, so therefore matter is evil. So therefore, if Jesus is an aeon close to, or if he is the eternal logos himself, he could not have actually taken on flesh, because that would be evil. And so that is the view of the Gnostics. So they often would claim that, for example, some of the Gnostic writings have like Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee and he didn't leave any footprints. The disciples would look back and see that he didn't leave any footprints, and that's because he was not really matter. He was just a phantom. He was just an illusion in his flesh. And as I said, this was an early heresy that we already see condemned at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 by the Nicene Creed itself, just by its affirmation of the humanity of Christ. It condemns Gnosticism and this docetic view. And we also see even John in 2 John, he says, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such one is a deceiver and an antichrist." And so notice here how John himself, how he holds this error as being so egregious that those that hold to it are antichrists. And so now you can understand why we as Christians that hold to Orthodox Christian views in our Christology is why we hold these things to be so important. Because the early Christian writers, when it came to Docetism, said that those who held to it were antichrists. We see also John address it in his first letter. In 1 John 4:2, it says, "By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God." And so the way that the early Christians could know that somebody was deceiving them and was not from God was if they taught this docetic view. So that's one to be aware of. The next one we're going to look at is Monophysitism. This comes from the Greek word monophysitismos, if I can say it right. It's kind of long there. Monophysitismos. There we go. Monophysitismos. One single nature, or physis, is where we get the English word monophysitism. And this is the belief that Jesus was only one nature that was divine. So he was only one nature. He did not have a human nature. And he was all divine. And this is to be contrasted with the Orthodox Christian view, which is Docetism, which means that Jesus has two natures. Those who opposed the Council of Chalcedon were called Monophysites. The Council of Chalcedon affirmed Docetism. And so those who opposed it were often labeled as Monophysites. This is to be slightly contrasted with another view, which is very similar to Eutychianism. And actually, Eutychius would have held to this, but slightly contrasted with the Monophysitism, which is said that the humanity and divinity of Christ were united in a separate new single nature. So they would, unlike Monophysitism, the Monophysitism would actually say that there was two natures of which Christ came from, but he was now united. Those were united in one nature, which is really the Eutychian view. Docetism, as I said before, was the position of the Council of Chalcedon in 451 A.D. So then we have Eutychianism. Eutychianism holds, comes from a man by the name of Eutychius of Constantinople. He lived from 380 to 446 A.D. And he held that Jesus had a human nature and a divine nature, but they were united in a new nature. The human nature was basically lost in the essence of the divine nature. And he would describe it as like a drop of vinegar in an ocean, which was dispersed. So that was Eutychius's view. And so the human nature was overcome by the divine nature and created this new nature. Christ had a human nature, but it was unlike the rest of humanity. And so Eutychianism is a very egregious error, because if Jesus was not like the rest of humanity, he is not our substitute, as we talked about earlier. And Christ was of two natures. What they would say, Eutychians would often say that Christ was of two natures, but was not in two natures. So he did not exist in two natures, but he came from two natures. They would say that Jesus was homoousian. Excuse me. Back to our words that we learned earlier on. Jesus was homoousian with the Father, of the same essence of the Father, but he was not homoousian with man, was the Eutychian view, which is, like I said, a problem, because now he is not our substitute. Is similar to Monophysitism, but I would say closer to Miaphysitism. A lot of times Eutychians were accused of being Monophysites, but I would say that they would be closer to Miaphysitism. This was also condemned at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 A.D. So another view that was promoted by Nestorius, which was the Patriarch of Constantinople, and he lived from 386 to 450 A.D., was he emphasized the disunion between the human and divine nature. So he affirmed Docetism. However, he said that Jesus existed in two subsistences. So he had two different natures, but also he was two different subsistences, or two different persons. So Jesus was actually two persons. And a lot of Nestorians would sometimes, in going through the Gospels, they would say, well, this here is the divine person speaking, and over here is the human person speaking. And they would separate Jesus into two persons. So Jesus had a multiple personality disorder. They would hold that that Christ had two loosely united natures, divine and human, not united in one person, as the hypostatic union, the Orthodox Christian view, is. They separate the natures to the point that Jesus was two persons. Nestorianism is the non-Orthodox form of Diophysitism. Remember, I said they did affirm Diophysitism. However, they did not affirm. They would be instead of hypostatic or hypostasis, they would affirm diastasis, or a two subsistences or two existences, two persons. So it was a non-Orthodox form. It's the opposite of Monophysitism. So Monophysitism, remember, as Jesus was only one nature, Nestorian absolutely affirmed that Jesus was absolutely two different natures, and there was not much of a union between them because it resulted in two different persons. It was condemned at the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD and the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD. Now, we swing all the way over to the right of our original chart, and now we're going to look at adoptionism. So this was the view that Jesus was not divine. He was not of the same substance as the Father. This would be a heterousios view, kind of like the Arians, except this is a little different than the Arian view. Adoptionism actually said that Jesus was a man adopted by God at his baptism. He was not divine at all. So if this is true, then we do not have the righteousness of God. We have our substitute now, but we don't have the righteousness of God. He was a man adopted by God at his baptism. That's typically when they say he was adopted by God. And that's because, God spoke from a cloud and said, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And so they would say that that's when he was adopted. They said that Jesus was chosen by God for adoption because of his sinless devotion to God. So often those that would hold to this would also hold to a pretty strong Pelagian view that man is capable in and of himself to be pleasing to God outside of even divine grace. And so that is the adoptionism view. Also sometimes called dynamic monarchianism, which is a form of modalism, since they would deny the triune nature of God. Then what was Jesus? So adoptionists would say that he was simply just a man, and he was adopted by God, the one being and person of God. They're Unitarians. And so if you want to get a more in-depth view of what dynamic monarchianism is, you'll have to go back to the episode on the Trinity on that. But so adopted by groups that deny the doctrine of the Trinity typically, and it was condemned at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. We also have a very well-known heresy, which I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with. And this is the heresy of Arianism. And we have modern Arians today. We have the Jehovah's Witnesses. And this was named after Arius of Alexander, and he lived from 250 to 336 AD. But during the same time, we have Athanasius and Augustine a little bit later. But so Arius said that Jesus, the Son of God, did not always exist, but was created by God the Father as the Son of God. So the Son of God was the first created being of God, and through this created being, he created the rest of creation. But Jesus was not eternally. He was heterousios. He's of a different substance. He's a creature. Once again, if this is true, then we do not have the righteousness of God. And in fact, we don't have a substitute either, because he was not. There's different views. He may not have been totally human either. So we have multiple issues here, but he definitely was not eternally God, so therefore we do not have the righteousness of God. They would say that he was ontologically subordinate to the Father because he's a different being. He's a created being, adopted by groups that deny the doctrine of the Trinity. Unitarians will adopt this particular doctrine. Not usually modal monarchians. Modal monarchians would say that God exists in different modes. Unitarians would say that there is only one person and being of God, and he never operates in different modes, and that Jesus was simply a different created being. Also, it was what's called a form of dynamic monarchianism. Was condemned at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. Arianism was. So now we're going to look at monothelitism. So this comes from the Greek word monothelitismos, one single will in Christ. And it was its precursor was called monoenergism. And it says that while it would say that there was two natures in Christ, Christ only exercised his divine will. He never exercised his human will. Well, this is a problem because we can see in Scripture that Jesus did exercise his human will. And if he didn't exercise his human will, he wasn't really human either. We see that he cried, he hungered, he thirsted, he was tempted. It tells us in James that God cannot be tempted, right? So how was Jesus tempted? Well, that's because he had a human will. And he exercised that human will. And Jesus had two wills. The Docetism is the Orthodox view. It was preceded by the teaching of monoenergism, one active energy, which would say that Jesus only exercised his divine nature. He didn't exercise his human nature. So it's basically just dead flesh going along with Jesus, his human nature, which is kind of the heresy of monoenergism. Which would mean that he wasn't while he contained a human nature, he didn't exercise it. So that doesn't really provide him as a substitute either. It attacks the substitution of Christ as our substitute. It's the opposite of Docetism, the view that Christ had two wills, human and divine, corresponding with his natures. That's the Docetism view. That's the Orthodox Christian view. And the interesting thing is, if you have Catholic friends, is Pope Honorius I taught both monoenergism and monothelitism. And this is really a difficulty for them when it comes to their doctrine of papal infallibility, which was affirmed, I think, by the First Vatican Council in the late 19th century. And this becomes a big problem because Honorius obviously taught monoenergism and monothelitism. And he taught that from his office as Pope, and which he was condemned, and both monoenergism and monothelitism were condemned at the Third Council of Constantinople in 681 AD. Along with, they condemned Pope Honorius I as a heretic because of this teaching. And so this really disrupts papal infallibility, which is a hilarious doctrine in and of itself. But caused a big problem for him because a later pope condemned Honorius as a heretic. So which one's infallible here? The one who condemned him or the one who taught the heresy? And this it really renders papal infallibility just a useless doctrine or a useless view, because if the pope, they'll say, well, he wasn't speaking ex cathedra. Okay, well, if a pope can teach monoenergism and monothelitism to the point that Honorius did, and he wasn't speaking ex cathedra, then you have no way of even knowing when a pope is speaking ex cathedra. You don't know. So the doctrine is completely useless because you never know whether a pope is teaching you anything infallibly, because he may be condemned later by a council or a later pope. So the doctrine or the view just becomes absolutely ridiculous, which it really is anyway. But so that is Monothelitism. The Orthodox Christian view is Docetism, and so that is the end of that presentation. So sorry for I have a major cough going on today. So hopefully that was useful to you. Hopefully it wasn't too disjointed, but I will go ahead and publish the PDF on that, and you guys can grab that if you want to grab a copy of that. Hopefully that helps clear up if you ever hear those terms used, and helps you understand them a little better, and helps you know how to defend the Christian view of Christ and who he was and what he accomplished, and a clear biblical view of the biblical Christian view of Christ and what he accomplished. So thank you for joining us, and just a reminder, go ahead and sign up for the drawing by posting your comments on iTunes, and you'll be eligible for the book drawing. So thank you. We'll see you guys next week, Lord willing. God bless.
Don't you know that the unjust will not inherit God's kingdom? And through Adam's offense,